I think with the digital transformation, many companies, you can see it's really completely ingrained into their organization, and it's touching every single part of their organization. I think with sustainability, we're not quite there yet, but that is what it's going to require. It's not the job of the CSO, it's the job of the entire company. And I think it's the companies who really see that are making the most progress and that are really reaping the benefits.
Hello, everyone. This is Barbara Humpton, CEO of Siemens USA, and thanks for listening to The Optimistic Outlook. Today, I'm going to bring you a conversation I had with Sabine Hoefnagel. She's the Global Head of Sustainability and Risk at ERM, the world's largest advisory firm focused solely on sustainability. In recent episodes, we've looked big picture at how to advance a clean energy future. In this episode, we explore a key trend moving this forward. That's the rise in corporate sustainability commitments, including ambitious net zero targets. According to Net Zero Tracker, just since June of 2022, the number of corporate net zero targets has risen more than 40% to include half of the world's 2,000 largest companies. Reports also say many companies will miss their decarbonization goals unless they work faster and with greater impact. In this episode, you'll hear us focus on net zero goals and decarbonization initiatives, but you'll also hear us refer to sustainability initiatives more broadly. All right, take a listen. Sabine, it is great to have you on the podcast.
So lovely to be here today. I'm really excited to join your podcast, particularly because it is so solutions focused, and we don't hear enough of that. So really, really pleased to be here today.
Oh, fantastic. You know, in my intro just now, I gave our audience a bit of background about ERM, but I'd love for you to fill us in. Tell us more about your business, the connection between risks and sustainability, and how does your risk analysis help your clients advance their goals?
Yeah, of course. And maybe also a little bit more background about myself. I'm a lawyer by training. I did a specialization in both environmental and human rights law. And my entire career has been in sustainability, starting in 1995, working with the United Nations. I was a very, very idealistic 20-something and thought that was the place where all the change would happen. And I was there for, maybe 5 years or so, and then got a little frustrated with the pace of change that I saw there and got very curious about the private sector and the role that could play. And so I joined ERM in the year 2000. And ERM is the world's largest pure play sustainability consultancy. And we work across a very wide range of industries and across any topic that falls under the umbrella of sustainability. So that's from climate change to nature, to the energy transition, to water, social impact, human rights, etc. And at ERM, I am the global leader of sustainability and risk. I'm also part of our executive committee and the board. The reason why I've stayed so long and why I love my job so much at ERM is really because of the purpose of our company, which is to shape a sustainable future with the world's leading organizations. And I've really had the chance to work on so many impactful and solution-oriented projects. But to come back to your question on this kind of link between the connection between risk and sustainability, which is very close to my heart because it's part of my job, and from my own role within ERM, but also from the work that I've done with clients, I really have seen both of these topics, risk and sustainability, become so much higher profile and more complex in recent years. And that goes from, the kind of the breadth of expectation across these agendas being so taxing and covering anything from financial risk to reputational risk to cybersecurity, geopolitics, climate change, human rights, you name it. And I think more and more we're seeing this, that the core business risks are very closely tied to sustainability topics. And if you look at the World Economic Forum's risk map that they bring out every year, in the past 5 years, we have seen sustainability topics being in the top 10. And I think many companies have very robust enterprise risk management systems, but they also often have sustainability approaches that are quite separate. And they might be managing these issues quite separately. And that often leads to either siloed thinking, inefficiencies, or really just missing risks. And I think the benefits of this better integration is really to sort of act as a radar system for the organization and alerting leaders in advance to the issues that might be coming up and the stakeholder expectations that are there, whether that is next week, next month, or next year. And that then allows the kind of type of reflection and investment and action that's required to minimize risk, but very importantly, also to grab the opportunities. Because I think in this world of sustainability, upside risk is as big as downside risk. And as soon as there's opportunities, you will see a real pull, like both inside and outside of organizations. And so I would always recommend companies to spend as much time looking at the opportunities rather than just at the risk. And I think many of these sustainability markets are scaling so much faster than people tend to realize. And I think that's clear around topics like renewables or electric vehicles. But it really will and is already disrupting every sector. And it really will become key for any company's future resilience.
I want to pull this thread on risk and opportunity and the opportunities ahead of us. But first, just to get a little bit of context over time, when you started in the year 2000, how different was the conversation than it is today?
It was very different. I think at that time, a lot of companies were treating these issues as compliance issues. There was by that time already quite a lot of environmental regulation, perhaps less so on the social side, which is also part of sustainability, of course. And companies are really doing their best to comply with these regulations. I think what we have seen over time is that all these issues have really become business critical and are now just part of the core strategy of a business. And the questions have really changed. I think maybe in the early 2000s, companies were thinking, okay, how do I get the permits to be able to build this piece of infrastructure? Or how do I comply with this air quality legislation or something like that? And now the questions are more like, what might be the financial impacts of climate change on my business? Very different question, much more complex, much more holistic. And what I would say, like, particularly if we're looking, like a topic like net zero, the approaches with regards to strategies really started changing since December 2015, when the Paris Agreement was adopted. And that was so significant, I think, for many reasons. Firstly, it really helped galvanize collective action. And secondly, it brought this very kind of clear and tangible shared objective, which was around, keeping average temperature rises well below 2 degree pre-industrial levels, and that was later updated to 1.5 degree. And I think pegging ambition to such a specific target really then made companies think much more about, kind of needing a science-based approach. And that led to a real surge in efforts to better understand risk. So this goes back to what I was just saying. It's not so much just about what might be a company's impact on the environment, but it's also what is the impact of the environment on a company, both from a physical perspective, how might your assets be exposed, but also from a transition perspective. How is your supply chain going to change? How are your consumers going to change, etc.? And I think there was a piece of voluntary standard that was brought in called the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. That was a major enabler, and that standard has now made its way into legislation in many countries. And I think as soon as companies started to understand risk, the need for action became so much clearer. And I think we still see lots of differences between different companies on where they are on their journey. But there is also very much a broad movement where companies are now starting to kind of move from setting ambition to really taking action. And every net zero strategy of any company, like including yours, will really look at how do I decarbonize my assets and my value chain? How do I rethink the products and the services that I'm able to provide? How do I integrate this into my, major capital project planning? And how might I adjust my portfolios that I have? And one sort of good example is, the work that we've done with JP Morgan Chase, where we designed the so-called carbon compass, which is really a tool that helps them to figure out how they might align their entire lending portfolio with a 1.5 degree trajectory. There are many examples, but that's just one.
That's a great example. And you think this is actually, I'm so glad you've talked about the financial sector in this review, because it's my impression that it's when the financial sector started to understand that things really began to change. I mean, when when companies start to realize that their cost of capital could be influenced by their own plans and actions, it meant that more and more CEOs everywhere had to be educated. They had to understand, wait, what's my responsibility? How can I demonstrate my actions appropriately so that I can demonstrate to those lenders who are going to help provide the capital that gives me the ability to grow? This is the flywheel effect that actually gets things going, that doesn't depend on legislation and regulation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like what I think is interesting about this conversation, that both our businesses have sustainability at the heart of our strategy. And I would love to hear a little bit more on how you have seen things change with your customers, as Siemens, with regards to these kind of sustainability and net zero approaches that we're seeing.
I think our experience at Siemens is very similar to yours. I'll go back to 2015 when Siemens became the first large industrial that made a commitment to be carbon neutral by 2030, to be halfway there by 2020. And, knowing that we were going to take the low hanging fruit and make a lot of progress at the beginning, recognizing that second half of the commitment was going to be much harder to achieve. We, very much focused on the things we understood about our own footprint. Just call it scope 1, that understanding. And then likewise, we began to hear our customers pick up on this idea, some of them for leadership reasons, right? Some of them for messaging reasons. And it's fascinating because the conversations soon turned to, hey, how is Siemens actually approaching this? Because we're not sure exactly where to start. And of course, I think we all go on a journey. Question number 1 is, what's our baseline? Question number 2 is, well, what are the things that are controllable within that baseline of ours? And then, where are there either technologies or processes, people changes, whatever, that can help us make progress? And what that's evolved to now is this incredible business opportunity. The idea that digitalization, the very tools that we're introducing to make manufacturing more productive, to make infrastructure more efficient, to make transportation more enjoyable, right? Those same tools of digitalization actually contribute to the process of meeting sustainability goals. So, I mean, the beautiful thing about the way Siemens business has evolved is that it has become our business. Our business is sustainability. And I'm also happy to say our business is sustainable.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting that you make this connection between digital transformation and sustainability, because I think there are actually a lot of parallels. I think companies are further ahead with digital transformation than they are with sustainability. And there's a lot of lessons, I think, that we can learn from that digital transformation.
One of the things you mentioned before is the Science-Based Target Initiative. And I know that you've adopted that in your own operations. Now, I'd be curious to know how difficult, how challenging the journey is within your own business, and how does tackling the problem for your own operations help inform the work that you do with your clients?
So ERM set its first science-based target aligned target in 2019, and we have updated it twice since then. And very recently, we announced our alignment with the so-called net zero standard, which is kind of like the highest standard that you can achieve under SBTi. And even though our business, our own footprint is really not that big compared to that for many of our clients, it's still been very challenging for us to get to this point. For us, it's also about figuring out how do we continue to grow whilst reducing that footprint. Now, the reason why it's been so important for us to align ourselves with SBTi and, set an ambitious target, I think is firstly, it really is about kind of walking the talk. We're a consultancy business. We have been tracking our greenhouse gas emissions across all 3 scopes for more than 10 years. We've been reporting on it. But like for many businesses, the majority of our emissions sit in our scope 3 in our value chain. Now, I think through doing that work, setting a target that is aligned, it allows us to have much more informed conversations with clients. And secondly, I also think it allows us to have bolder conversations with clients, because we see ourselves as a leader in our industry, and we very much want to be a leader. And I think by showing that we have done this ourselves, I think it allows us to better understand perhaps and to challenge our clients more what really transforming their businesses is going to require to be ready to operate in this net zero environment. you're on a similar path, and you have obviously a very, quite considerable manufacturing footprint. So I'd love to hear from you as well. How have you gone about that internal journey?
Well, inside Siemens, if you sort of take as that starting point, the commitment to be net zero, we then subsequently signed up for the science-based target initiatives. And initially we had committed to a 50% absolute reduction in CO2. But because we've been working on it, we've seen the art of the possible. We've actually increased that to 90%. So what's fascinating is that this question of how to take care of our own footprint, the buildings, the industrial processes, et cetera, that actually has been fairly straightforward. Another example is we have fleets of vehicles all around the world. Here in the United States, say 10,000 vehicles. And we set this goal of, hey, we're going to be all EVs by 2030. In order to do that, we'll lease our last gas-powered vehicle in like 2027. And I recently saw the report from the team who's managing all the leases. We're actually due to be 100% electric by 2028 instead of 2030. It turns out that, once the momentum kicks in, it actually kicks in a big way. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who said, I never knew how powerful an electric vehicle was. I never realized how easy it was going to be. I had no idea how cheap it is to operate. So what I've loved is the uptake effect within our own operations. And so then the question is, exactly as you say, scope 2, scope 3, what do we do about the biggest slices? We know that our supply chain actually contains a lot of emissions. And so one of the things our colleagues developed first was a green digital twin. As you buy products and you're comparing products, can you also compare the carbon emissions of both offerings and make your decisions wisely? And by the way, what we're finding is you actually don't have the false choice that's often presented. Do you want to be sustainable or do you want to be cheap? It turns out that cost and sustainability actually aren't coupled that way. So we're having a lot of fun in the supply chain analysis, finding the win-win-win. I would ask you though, Sabine, the biggest factor, and I've seen this in a couple of segments, particularly the services segment, travel is a huge challenge. Companies that rely on air travel now have to think about what are they going to do. And I talked last year to a marketing exec, not for the Optimistic Outlook podcast. It was just a sidebar conversation at an event. And she said, we've made this commitment internally. What it's meant is that we travel less to customers. And I'm finding that to be a real problem in our competitive world where other offerers are flying teams of people all around. They're physically present. There are lots of FaceTime with customers. That's got to be an issue for you all at ERM. Tell me about how you're tackling the travel challenge.
Yeah, that's a very timely question. We're literally just about to release our completely rethought through travel policies coming in like the next couple of weeks. Because yeah, you're right. For us, travel is a big part of our scope 3, and at the same time, we have really an imperative to be with our clients and to be able to interact with them. So the way that we're going about it is in firstly, putting the bar pretty high. And, there's also internal travel, which is what we do when executives come together or people just, teams meet, etc. And the bar for that travel is really high. We've also looked at how can people combine travel? Maybe 10 years ago, I would still fly to Singapore for a meeting for 2 days. That would never happen anymore, right? I would really see how I can combine things. Other things that we looked at is that we saw that actually quite a lot of our carbon emissions came from short haul flights. And particularly in Europe, people can nowadays get somewhere by train. So we have said any trip that can be done by train in less than 5 hours is mandatory by train. Like you can't fly. And it's quite remarkable to see what has come out of that. Now, the argument that what you've just said, I've heard it as well, saying but competitors are still, constantly with clients. I'm not so sure that that is really true and that clients necessarily require that. It's also, a lot of this has to do with the culture change. And I think, sort of setting the example from the top and showing how things can be done differently is really, really important. And there is still an enormous amount of benefit and impact to be had from face-to-face connections. But we have all learned over the last few years that actually quite a lot is not necessarily, it needs to be done in such a way. And I think that's the same with, in how you interact with your customers. So a lot of this is also around kind of culture change, I think, and, taking people along on a journey. Now, and then, of course, there's also a technology element to this, like sustainable aviation fuels are under development. And, and that is also, as you just said, like what we're seeing with many developments, things are going faster than people think. Like if we're now looking at, if you're looking at the deployment curves of renewables, we are way beyond what anyone was ever expecting with regards to offshore, onshore wind, solar, et cetera, EVs, than what people thought. And even like 3 years ago, we are still like beating every target out of the water. And most of those development curves, tend to be hockey sticks. They're not simply, linear. So I think, technology will have a key role to play there as well.
Yeah, what's the phrase? Change happens slowly until it happens all at once. So we're in the middle of a lot of hockey sticks right now. I'm curious. I want to bring this back then to the whole concept of the services you provide to customers. And this is the optimistic outlook. We'll look at the downside first. When you look at risk these days, what are the biggest risk factors that the majority of your customers are dealing with when it comes to climate?
I think it depends on what industry you're operating in. And that is why, if a company is starting out, we would always say start with doing a materiality assessment and look at that both ways. So both like what are your impacts on the environment and communities, and also vice versa. Like, what are the impacts of climate change and the environment and communities on you? And what I would say, like for some businesses, it really is about physical risk. So if you are in agribusiness, for example, a lot of your assets will be affected by changing weather patterns, and that can be really, really significant. For other businesses, it can be more around, kind of transition risks in, their supply chain will have to change. So it is quite specific and different for industries. Not everybody is going to go on the same path. But some of the things that you mentioned are really applicable to everyone. There is still so much that can be done with some relatively easy steps around energy efficiency. I mean, you'd be surprised at how many businesses still have not really grabbed that lever. And that is something that applies to almost any company, because any company will be an energy user to some extent. And by bringing energy efficiency and switching to renewables, like you can make a really, really big step. So, but I think the most important element to mention maybe is that it really differs depending on what industry you're in.
Yeah, just a curiosity question for you is the insurance industry, right? So the key to successful management of insurance programs is being able to model risks. And I'm curious what's happening to the risk models as insurers everywhere are trying to understand the effects of climate. What are you seeing?
I think the insurance industry has been aware of this much longer than, maybe companies have been really talking about very openly, because they saw this coming, and it's a massive risk to their industry. And we're seeing already now that in certain locations or with certain assets, you cannot insure them because of climate change. Now, having said that, I still think that there is still room for the insurance industry to do more themselves. I think they are very, very aware and have very good models around physical climate risks, and they will be very, very well informed. But I think, this transformation that we're going through will really completely change the way we systemically do business. And, there's perhaps more work to be done there.
I'm thinking a little bit about the tools we bring into the industry, that digital modeling that can help people understand and forecast, for the products they're building, for the facilities they're building. One of the things we've worked with in the insurance industry is this idea that by modeling, we get more certain results, and perhaps there are beneficial effects for insurance premiums to those who are using digital tools. Likewise, could there be beneficial effects in insurance premiums for those who are taking action? Because quite frankly, we all wrestle with what's the cost of doing nothing. And, that's what those companies are up against today. Now, let me flip this around and say, let's talk for a minute about the opportunities ahead, because you're working with clients who are in fact seeing that there are new business models emerging. There are new product offerings that are possible today. And so a proactive stance on the subject of sustainability. How are you seeing companies launch new initiatives? And tell me about the qualities of those companies who are taking positive action today.
There are some obvious spots, like already mentioned renewables. And it is simply unprecedented what we have seen there, what we're still seeing there. And to some extent, some of that has been developed by completely new companies, but we have also seen companies who, traditionally were very focused on fossil fuels, who are really changing their business model. And Ørsted in Denmark is a very good example of that. That used to be a state-owned oil and gas company, and is now one of the biggest renewable companies in the world. Obviously supported in the early years by the government. Still, there are many similar examples. But I think that even in perhaps kind of harder to abate sectors, we are also seeing real progress. Like if we're thinking about green steel, for example, and the potential that is there. Also, if we're thinking about, there will still be parts of the economy that are going to be, very hard to keep going without fossil fuels. But then there's the potential of carbon capture and storage, which cannot be denied. And there's just so many different levels development going on. The same in agribusiness. If you're looking at like the development of seeds that are more climate resistant, etc. There is just so much innovation going on in every single sector all over the place, and it's really, frankly, really very, very exciting. You talked about, what are the kind of qualities of businesses that are doing that? We're actually about to launch a report together with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, which is an industry organization of about 220 leading businesses, very much focused around sustainability. And that report is around how can companies really navigate this sustainability transformation? And we've kind of looked at 5 key areas of activity. And what it really comes down to, I think, is to firstly have really committed and knowledgeable senior leaders. And with that, I mean, including at board member level and executive. Secondly, to really set a clear plan. Thirdly, to integrate that truly into your business model in the way that Siemens has done that and is doing that. And then next, to find those spots of where sustainability can add value and how you can use it to differentiate yourself in the marketplace, because there will be higher premiums for more sustainable solutions. And in many places, they are already there. And then last, perhaps, to partner with others up and down your value chain, because we're talking about systemic change here. I don't think any company can really do this on their own. So collaborating with other companies, either within your sector or within your value chain will be really important. And then perhaps one additional element to think is also to really stick with it and to have a certain tenacity. And I think that is where also this parallel that we talked earlier about with the digital transformation is so important. And I think with the digital transformation, many companies, you can see it's really completely ingrained into their organization, and it's touching every single part of their organization. I think with sustainability, we're not quite there yet, but that is what it's going to require. It's not the job of the CSO. It's the job of the entire company. And I think it's the companies who really see that are making the most progress and that are really reaping the benefits.
I'm seeing this with customers as well. And I'll give you the example of the healthcare sector. A couple of years ago, we had a really innovative radiologist from UC San Francisco who said, what if I could use less power in my radiology equipment? What would it take? Siemens, can you partner with me to help me figure out how to be more sustainable in radiology. Well, it turns out the radiology departments of hospitals are huge energy users. You've got to keep those big magnets, electrified. We went to work with them, and, in one place, UC San Francisco did an experiment, discovered changes could be made. I've done an episode on this. Others can see it in the Optimistic Outlook podcast series. That has blossomed into an effort that has reached across the healthcare sector as radiologists have said, wait, I can do that. I can do that. And suddenly there's a movement. Now, couple that with the journey that hospitals are on. And so I hear the 5 elements of your findings about leadership reflected in the healthcare sector, where there is understanding at the top and the recognition that you need a plan. And then what we've developed at Siemens is a roadmap that says, hey, any individual healthcare organization is going to be at some place on this journey. We can meet them wherever they are. So if we're meeting them in those early stages, it may be a bit of strategy and training for top management. If we're meeting them in the in the later segments of their journey, it could be the carbon accounting and new tools to help them address their needs. All of that comes together. I think the key message that I'm trying to make sure we share everywhere is that there is nothing too small to pay attention to. That changes in individual departments, like the radiology department, can turn into massive movers because it's small actions everywhere that actually tip the needle. Now, when we do that, what's fascinating about this is there's another cultural thing in organizations we all strive for: empowerment. Right? So if management is setting the North Star that says, here's our goal, we want to be a more sustainable business, but each of you has a role to play, then it unleashes the creativity of people in the organization to say, what changes can we make? Frankly, I think this is the reason why we're beating our milestones. Our managing board at Siemens has been incredibly clear. We have a degree framework, and this is the way we report on our sustainability results every year. A couple of years ago, we set targets and have discovered now we have to reset them because we've overachieved. It's time to now put new milestones in place to strive for.
That reminds me of an example that I heard from somebody who works in a big port, which is a huge business. And the person said that in their business, and it sounds so silly, but one of the things that really started to make things change is that when they were instigating a new travel policy, it suddenly became personal. It started to be another lever for different decisions to be made. And that kind of powered with seeing executive management really following through on the commitments that they've made.
What's the basic thing we've learned about market dynamics, right? Free markets work as all externalities are factored in. And so by giving members of the market feedback about the kind of impact they're having, they start to make good market-driven decisions. It's exciting to see the scales tipping, which actually just leads me to the question I love to ask all of my guests. This is the Optimistic Outlook podcast, and that I'm very optimistic about the future. I do believe we have the tools. I believe we have the mindset. I believe we have what it takes to build a really exciting future. I'm curious about your own view. What fuels your optimism, and what does the world look like if you're able to help these companies address their risks and build a better tomorrow?
So my take on this is that I think we simply cannot afford a plan B if we want humanity to thrive on this planet. And I love it how Christiana Figueres, who I know you've also had on your podcast, talks about stubborn optimism, and also how she talks about the fact that if you want change to happen, you need to believe that change is possible. And I'm really a subscriber of that. And I see that in my day job a lot. But there's also a more personal perspective, perhaps. I sit on the supervisory board of a wonderful NGO called Rewilding Europe, which is kind of engaged with rewilding landscapes. And through that, I have seen the incredible power of nature and regeneration. And I really believe that humans are part of that. And this kind of possibility of restoration and the importance of linking climate with nature and social issues in a holistic way, and achieving a better future as a result, I really believe that that is possible. And yes, we are facing some pretty existential challenges, and transitions can be super tough. But at the same time, we already have a lot of the answers, and a lot of the answers are working. And whether that is through technology or through relying on the power of nature. And for me, these two truths exist at the same time. And as a person and as a business, you can choose where you want to focus. So I really think everyone has a choice to make. Like, what side do you want to be on? And I choose to be on the optimistic side.
Sabine, thank you so much for joining us on the Optimistic Outlook.
I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Sabine, and I'll just echo one interesting opportunity she pointed out. Sabine noted how we see many companies making progress, advancing digital transformation. Digital transformation, though, is also the key to becoming more sustainable, which only strengthens the business case for sustainability. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Please follow us on social media and on your favorite podcasting platform. Thank you for tuning in.